I'm very excited to be here to announce our next speaker. I hope you had a lovely few minutes where you actually stood up and actually took a stretch and actually had a sip of water. Very important here, people. So, speaking about our next guest, when community is treated as a strategic asset of the business, it becomes one of the most important conduits an organization has. Our next speaker will explore how to expand what your community can do and give some new metrics you can use to help you achieve this goal. He is the VP of Solution Strategy at Khoros with a focus on the community market. In his current role, he spends most of his time in front of customers and prospects, helping to cast vision to best position online community engagement as a driving force in helping brands improve customer retention and lower organizational support costs. So, he's an expert. Please welcome Michael Puhala.
Hello and good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where on the planet you are sitting at right now. Like she said, my name is Michael Puhala, and I am approaching my 10-year anniversary with Khoros next week, actually. And before you dismiss this as a vendor presentation, maybe with a hidden agenda, they're going to try to sell me something on why Khoros is so great or whatnot. I actually want to put your mind at ease in that we really thought a lot about how to be intentional about this topic, specifically for community managers and also for those maybe those overseeing community or executives that have oversight of community about this topic. And we wanted to share something of value. We'll share a couple of case studies along the way that customers on outcomes, and you won't hear very much in terms of a Khoros pitch, if at all. So. Happy to share, and then I hope that we'll also have some time for some questions. So if you think of any questions while we are in process of the presentation, hold those to the end, and the team will be moderating and then throwing over some questions. We should have a little bit of time and look forward to spending the next 25 or 30 minutes with you today. I'm actually very honored to be here and presenting to you. Always like presenting specifically to kind of the community manager community, if you will. So that's it's an honor and privilege for me. So thank you much. How do we really effectively make communities that are support or that go beyond support? And when I say community, we're using, of course, the capital C, community, to be an agent of change. So with that in mind, the goal today is if you're a community manager, the goal is to help you articulate within your organization why community should be greater than just seen as something that helps with support. If you are already in that category, then one, kudos and congratulations. Two, hopefully this will then serve as maybe more of a foundation or for you might be able to get little quibbits here and there to take community even further than where it is today. If you are somebody who is an executive or overseeing the community function within your organization, then hopefully this will then expand the horizon a bit for community to accomplish more things. And the ultimate goal here is how can communities become a change agent within the organization beyond that of support. And so everything that we're going to be talking about is with that in mind. So we will go ahead and proceed as I have my controls here, and we're good. So as we throw up some statistics, I do not need to tell you just how big the community market has the opportunity to impact. That being said, when we're saying that businesses spend 1.3 trillion on 265 billion customer service calls, that's a huge number. And rather than us saying, well, this is why community exists, this is actually could be considered to be a trap of keeping us in a support silo because this number is so large. It is oftentimes why organizations approach a community initiative to begin with. So sometimes it's easy just to fall in to this trap of, hey, the community is there as a support mechanism or to offload our call center or to deflect calls or to provide better support only for the organization. So we really want to look at this community as more holistically. And yes, of course, these are huge numbers, and the numbers that we're looking at here specifically are almost what keeps us as community professionals in this silo of support. So that being in mind, how do we then extend community within our organizations to be something more? And I'm not going to bore you with, say, the timeline of brand engagement holistically. That being said, we are in a, if you saw in the opening slide, I'm going to try to avoid cliche terms in and around our peri-COVID world. We could say that we live in unprecedented times, or we've never done this before. However, when we do see, what we are seeing in, just like when a brand goes into crisis mode and social spikes up, we're seeing that globally as a result of the pandemic. And we're seeing trends of community traffic, and I'll touch upon that in my next slide. But here, I want to illustrate a specific story of, oftentimes we create an experience for our customers, such to help our customers through either an issue, a question, or to connect with others. What if community is used to help the brand itself? And I'll illustrate that with a story. I'm a coffee snob. I love coffee. I've got a commercial espresso set up in my kitchen. It's something that I'm a part of. I'm a part of the greater coffee community in the community that I live here in Phoenix, Arizona. But I'm also part of a greater community online of coffee enthusiasts or baristas or whatnot, people that are pursuing coffee. There is a brand of grinder for grinding coffee called Baratza, based in Seattle, Washington. A few years back, they had a problem with somebody squatting their Twitter handle or hijacking the name, such that they could not use their name Baratza on Twitter. So they had to use some offshoot of that name, which was causing a problem over time of people being able to find them or people confusing the brand. So they reached out to an influencer. I was not an influencer in the coffee community, but I did listen to, or I was part of the influencer's audience who reached out saying, hey, is there anybody at Twitter, or is there anybody that knows anyone at Twitter that can help someone out? I saw that and I reached out and said, hey, I have some connections at Twitter, would love to help out in any way possible. Long story short, over the course of the next 24 hours, we've got their Twitter handle back to them, migrated all their followers from the old other handle to their new improved Baratza handle on Twitter. And as a result, actually, the brand reached out and gave me a nice free grinder. But beyond that extrinsic, I didn't do it for any reward other than wanting to participate and help out somebody else in the coffee community. And so that's an example of maybe the community giving back to the brand, where sometimes we think of. So, and they had the currency, the social currency, and the brand love, I would suggest, where people would come out and help them on their behalf, and that worked out in their favor. But it's no surprise, though, in this current climate, that we're seeing a massive spike in digital engagement and online participation, and specifically community participation. And Khoros serves roughly 4 billion page views annually. And so we have quite a large data social set in which to analyze and see. And we've seen since March a 47% increase in that traffic. That perhaps is not surprising considering what we know of people going now to a digital first or digital only in some brands response to how they are dealing with the new reality. But maybe what is surprising is the statistic that is saying that we're seeing, on average, we're seeing constant reply rates and constant solution rates. So what this tells me is that community scales really well. And this is without the addition of adding resources to the community team. This is the community coming up to help answer the questions and to help provide solutions to people's problems or questions that they have to community. So we're suggesting here that communities are super resilient to handling not only a demand in traffic, but also helping other users. And so when we see that, I want to make a reference here. Maybe it's appropriate this year in 2020 to make a reference to a specific Black Mirror episode. If you're a fan of Black Mirror, you might remember an episode. It's called Bandersnatch. And in that episode was an innovative way in which to interact with the programming itself, meaning that if you had the right technology and you were watching this, say, on a computer, you were given choices. And in those choices, that you, based upon your selection, that would change the outcome of that of the show itself. So innovative. So I'm going to be using this Bandersnatch maybe reference from time to time to suggest that we have choices on a daily basis to make. And so are we going to choose, in this case, to continue down the silo of support, or can we maybe consider we want our community to be something more and move beyond support? And so if we go down that path for a few minutes and indulge what it could look like, or how do we go down that path, that's what we're going to be spending the next few minutes on. It's no surprise, though, that the uphill battle that we have in reaching beyond support is that the community function itself, that within the organization oftentimes sits in the support organization. Our own experience as a platform vendor is that 60 to 70% of communities are a part of the support organization. So it is rather easy to be siloed into that support realm and support only realm. So I guess the question is, does that mean we're stuck in support? And as I suggested earlier, and to use another Bandersnatch reference and screenshot in this case, what might be seemingly small incremental changes or decisions that we make on a daily basis could have large effects over time. And so if we kind of make those incremental steps to move community beyond support, then we will start to see long-term results happening. Sometimes we don't see immediate results, so therefore we maybe make different decisions. If I use an analogy of a triathlete, if you talk to any triathlete, one of the things that they'll say is they have a preferred discipline, which is usually their strength, and then they have a least preferred or maybe a least favorite discipline. Generally, it's usually swimming. But it could be any one of the three disciplines of swimming, biking, or running. And what triathlete trainers will tell them is not to spend more time on their least, just in terms of blocks of time, but to spend a little time every day in their area of weakness, not hours upon hours, and where maybe one part suffers as a result of another, but to incrementally add a little bit of time on the weakest discipline every day, which will then over time improve that particular discipline. And I would suggest that community function, to move beyond support, we need to make incremental steps to move well beyond support itself. So in that vein, it's not surprising to any of you that we're seeing, make sure we have the build out here, of communities on the social channels. We're seeing massive amounts of people, and this is really about people craving connection. So then how then do we create connection and community to kind of more than just a kind of support-oriented workflow of that? So, if we combine all of the communities of record beyond Facebook here, if we could talk about Reddit, Wikipedia, YouTube, Instagram, Quora, and whatnot, we're seeing that there's 30 billion monthly visits, because this is getting to this notion of people craving and valuing connection, learning from others that they trust within the given context of that specific community. That being said, if we're outsourcing the larger, let's call it remit or sharing of experiences beyond our own community, we're starting to see more issues or more sites of disparate nature, of disconnections, of unmanaged or uncontrolled experiences, or experiences that are beyond the control of the brand. It can get so. So once we start to bring that connection into our own community, we're starting to see that the success belongs to those brands that invest in that human connection experience. And again, so this is more of a philosophical approach, but when we start to make strides towards this human connection opportunity that exists within the communities that we serve, then we're starting to move beyond just how do we help with call deflection, how do we help with support costs of the brand. That being said, we really want the ultimate goal, and I'll use some examples here of some communities that are being that agent of change, that we're helping to build trust, build shared experiences, and yes, at the end of the day, accelerate answers. At the end of the day, when we think about communities that are support-oriented, it's there's two types of, I think, support that people are looking for when they're coming on the community. There's what we'd call the break fix. Something's broken. I don't know if it's a bug or something on my end. I need it to be fixed. But then there's the other side of the equation of that support is how do I do this very complex thing, or how do I get better at this? What we're trying to achieve. A Sephora community where people are trying to learn more about beauty techniques. A Fitbit community that is trying to be better at health and wellness in general, beyond just perhaps maybe hey, my battery's not working, or how do I fix this particular problem with my device. So when we're starting to build the kind of trust amongst peers and brand to peer or brand to customer, with building upon those answers. So if we look at our communities of record of kind of along the spectrum of both, if we look at two axes of impact and value, and not only impact and value to the organization, but if we also look at it with the axis of impact and value to the community contributor or the participant in this case. So there's effectively four different values here: impact to the organization, impact to the customer, value to the organization, and value to the organization or to the customer. Often we see that when community is just working as a channel of support, it tends to not fulfill its or live up to what community can be. And in some cases that can move towards clearly self-sustaining just through cost deflection and cost savings for an organization. But when we see that community moving up the impact and value to both constituents, it starts to move towards that community as being a change agent within the organization. So that being said, we want to give you a roadmap for, or really three areas to focus on to help move community to be that change agent within the organization. Some of these, aren't going to be, light bulb kinds of topics, but I think when we kind of go into the nuance of each of these, we can learn, say, are there areas where we can do better? Where we can expand understanding or knowledge within the organization to move community along the progression of not only a healthier community, but one that really advances change within the organization. So this first one is in leadership. It's easy as a community manager for us just to ask for more resource. It's easy for us to ask for more budget. Maybe it's really difficult for an organization to assign that resource or budget. Rich Millington of Fever-Bee actually published a blog this week titled "If I Had More Resources." In that blog, he suggested that rather than ask for more resource, organizations should be more creative with the resources they have. And I probably would tend to agree with that, in that it's not always about getting more resource. If we can get more resource, and if we can prove incremental value that the community is providing the organization, ultimately, hopefully, we're being given more resource, more budget, more staff, more attention within that organization. But we don't always have the luxury of that resource, and maybe even in the existing climate, we have a frozen set of resources or even reduced set of resources. So not using that as an excuse. Certainly, if you don't already have a 6 or 12-month roadmap for community well defined within the organization, that can be a place to start to understand how to build out additional resources, or why the justification and the need for that resource is. And then one thing that we can do to mitigate a lack of resources within community is to build a cross-functional headcount within the organization, or cross-functional, I should say, support of community that is not necessarily considered to be part of the community team, but certainly advocates within the organization that help us build the cause for expanding the community use case within the organization. And of course, with that also comes this increase of visibility, hopefully to multiple executive sponsors. So while we might have officially one executive sponsor as a part of community, the more advocacy that we can build among the executive team, then the more usually attention and light gets shined on community as a result. We see it time and time again in Khoros, is when community starts to build its case for being beyond support, then executive team tends to get behind that, and it becomes more a strategic part of that organization's purpose in how they're building out community. You know, one way that I could always tell that community, how important community is within the organization, kind of leads me to this next point. But before I get to that point, let's talk about an example of someone doing this really well, and that's SAS. SAS Institute is an analytics software company that's a global company. One of the things that I think is really interesting that they've done to really build out visibility within the organization is they invest heavily into videos. They apply videos all over their corporate blog, all over the community, and then of course promote the same videos on their YouTube channel. And this cross promotion of content across their .com to community YouTube has led to 257% rise in their YouTube subscription. But it not only has it done that, we see they're already on track this year to surpass their growth rate of last year. They're already at 22,800 new members year to date, which if on the same trajectory, they had 38,000 new members of their community last year. This is a community that's over 10 years old and still experiencing, I would say, explosive growth within their community. They're seeing 11.2 million page views to their community year to date, and so they will surpass last year's 20 million easily of community. So the community growth is substantial, but I think what's also interesting is this really support of video inside of community, and how that then cross permeates to the places where SAS lives. On the next point when we're talking about the visibility within the community, just like there are two dimensions of both impact and value, there are two dimensions of visibility, and the visibility within the organization that community has and the impact that it's making, and of course the visibility to your customer base. Maybe the last one is rather obvious, but it's still surprising to me. And the point that I wanted to make earlier was I can always tell about a brand's commitment to community, about understanding where community lives as a part of its .com promotion. And the question that I ask is community considered to be a first-class citizen as a part of the .com experience? And then we find varying degrees of influence that a community team has within the visibility of, say, the .com navigation, the global navigation. It might be something that's highly political within your organization to gain kind of that first-class citizenship. But if I'm seeing community buried in a tertiary menu as a part of support, well, then it's clear not only that community is a support-only function within that, but we're also teaching our community members what this community is about. So if we can extend the visibility beyond that support silo, if we can extend it, and I'm seeing more and more and more where community link is very prominent as a part of that hierarchy of global navigation, if not as part of one of the primary elements that community is focused on. It doesn't always need to be kind of right up there with the 5 or 6 or 7 things that are listed up top. But how many times is it being promoted and across that organization? But another element of visibility that we want to talk to is how do we then promote the community, not only community metrics, but business KPIs that community is impacting across the organization. We see that all the time when community managers are building out dashboards for executives or dashboards for product teams, dashboards for support teams around the KPIs that community is helping to serve. Not just what I would call community vanity metrics. Certainly community metrics like user growth and participation, time on site, the number of accepted solutions, the number of likes or kudos given are all important metrics to track and measure. But we want to make sure that we're also contributing or displaying and promoting the business level metrics that community is helping to support, if not directly behind that there's some both causation and correlation against the community participation against the business value metrics. An area that or a company that's doing this quite well is Click. Click is also an analytics company. I just happen to choose 2 analytics companies that have chosen Khoros as their platform. But I think what's interesting about Click, one is they are their growth is amazing. They restarted their community initiative a few years back, where they were on Jive. They've moved to Khoros and they kind of have doubled down in their investment. And where I think it's important to understand just the amount. I think the stat that I find really interesting is how they're bringing in employees to participate as a part of that. So they're seeing a huge increase in employee participation in the community. And then, of course, it is helping the bottom line and the top line of the case reduction. But the overall community growth is pretty astounding from Click. And if you look at global navigation, community shows up in 2, 3, or 4 different places in and around their global navigation. It's not just as a part of a support function. So good job for Click. The last piece here that I want to reiterate as a part of this is this notion of bidirectional learning. When I say bidirectional learning is, of course, we expect community participants to learn from each other and learn from the brand. I mean, that's part and parcel to the mission of what community is doing. But how is the brand taking learnings from the community itself? And that's one that I would say is a higher purpose and one that communities don't always get right. Just by throwing ideation out, for an example, you might suggest that, hey, the brand is listening to the community. And we always have a litmus test for if ideation is even an area that the organization is ready. How much organizational readiness is there for ideation to take place? And what I mean by that is, do we have a complete kind of set of workflow all the way to the product team and the executive team as to how feedback is being used and how ideas are being used and utilized within the community? How are we promoting the status of those ideas? How are we promoting the innovation of our organization? And are we communicating back the progress of that to our community? So I always am interested to understand how organizations are listening to their communities, and then not only listening, and then hopefully what's actionable, and then how are they responding to something like ideas. And it's not just so much the generic suggestion box that goes into a black box and we never understand what happens after that, but we really clearly understand the life cycle of an idea and whether it gets put into in a set of implementation or a set of end results for the outcome. A company that does this really well across the board in and around this bidirectional learning is Anaplan. Something about Anaplan, just that you should know, they have 10 full-time resources dedicated to community. So right there, that tells you their commitment to community. Interestingly enough, too, they're using group hubs as a relaunch to community, but they've also integrated that to Bevy. So they have a Bevy integration in terms of events. So shout out to Bevy on that as well. But what I find interesting is and how Anaplan would learned from the community and it was launching additional initiatives is they would say that prior to community, Anaplan had no way in which to produce a free trial of their own software. And once they were getting community at its stride, they were able to onboard new users of their software a lot easier. And so they have a full training and onboarding program, which then enabled to provide a complete trial program of which then increased not only the use of community, but also their software. So a huge win for the community, for the organization to take community as a foundation to be able to push into new go-to-market strategies for the organization, which is really exciting to me. The reason why I'm still so excited after 10 years of being in this category is just seeing what community can do for an organization. Again, well beyond that of the support costs. So that being said, we have a choice. Are we simply going to have community as an extended element of our support experience, or will it be an agent of change? One thing that I want to leave you with is this level set of stats, which are coming from McKinsey. McKinsey report came as recent as May of this year, and then the Accenture data is coming from since October of last year. And I would suggest that this data is even low, considering the climate of change that we're in right now. So we're seeing 3 times shareholder value when customer experience and digital leaders are kind of committing to the customer experience, particularly in and around the engagement of the brand. We're seeing 2 times annual revenue growth, and we see a 46% more revenue by 2023 in terms of a projection. Again, I think that could be low for those brands and organizations that are kind of all in on the digital engagement experience, which community is a large part of. So that being said, I want to wrap this up. I want a few minutes just for questions if there are any. I'll also take this time that this is also our next week is our own conference that we have. So feel free if you want to go to and register on Khoros. We have our own community of community professionals, if you will. And our conference is free to attend and is happening next week. But feel free to also attend our own booth here at the CMX Summit and talk with us. But want to leave any time for questions that there might be.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Michael. We do actually have quite a few questions. You inspired a great conversation about where communities live within organizations. And a lot of people were sharing their own experiences there. So I guess the first question is from Oliver, and it's about his community, which has a support aspect, is actually in a team in the organization which is not support. So he wonders if you've come across this scenario and how can you implement support into a community that isn't technically a support community.
Yeah. So when we say 60 to 70% live in support, well, that leaves us with 30 to 40% that don't live in that support function. Oftentimes we find that it lives in marketing, maybe as a result of social functions. So one of the things that I talked about is creating advocacy across the organization that aren't sitting inside our community. So how do we reach out to other members of the organization and get time on their calendar to say, hey, is there, I will always invite when somebody says, hey, I have something to help you in your, with your own KPIs, with your own MBOs. If you come to somebody saying, I'm going to help you with your MBOs, how can community help your function of the business? Then that would be the best way that I would help promote in reaching across to other organizations and starting to build advocacy for how. So I would talk to somebody in support to say, how can community help in that effort to help them achieve their own goals. So once you start to understand their objectives and their MBOs, then we can put some, I think, real weight behind what community can do for them.
I think that's really good advice. Just straight up asking what people need from community and how community can solve other teams' goals. I think that's really, really good advice.
Thanks. So any other questions that might, I know we just looks like about a minute left, so.
Yes, we do have one more question. Speaking about support, well, you talked about authenticity in a support community. Do you believe it's possible for a brand to authentically connect with their community with sales or acquisition goals?
I do, and we do see it quite often happening, although there's lots of wrong ways to do it and a few right ways to do it. I think there's not one single right way. As communities can then help the top line for a company in their growth, we always look at it from a kind of, if you look at it from a Jeffrey Moore for gear, there's this notion of acquisition gear. So how do we help communities? We might think of acquisition as growing community, but then how do we think of communities as extending the growth of our own customer base? And I think that, I'll go back to the Anaplan example of they were able to onboard new trials of their community or of their product through community. So I think we need to think outside of the box of how community, because simply inserting a salesperson professional into a conversation asking a question might seem inauthentic or might seem selfish on my part of the brand. So I get there may be reservation for a brand to maybe hit the brakes a little bit in trying to promote its own, or pull out the bullhorn in favor. But when we're adding value to the customer experience, then we're going to increase the customer adoption of our products. So I would just say look for creative ways like Anaplan has done to onboard or kind of create awareness for what the company's mission is, and then align the mission of community with the mission of the organization. So if there's not a mission statement that you don't have on your community, get to work. I think we need to build mission statements for community that's beyond the mission of just support.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. There are still more questions in the chat, but unfortunately we're out of time. So I suggest, Michael, you go through the chat and see if there's any questions you can help answer in there.
Okay.
Thank
great.
you.
I'll do that. Thank you.